want us to talk about one of the many disabilities that we may experience in the classroom. Now, we need to recognize that specific learning disabilities is only one of the different ones that may manifest itself in the classroom. Some of them may be physical disabilities, others will be a lot more involved. A specific learning disability is defined as a difficulty in understanding the basic processes of language and writing. And the way we see this in the classroom is by the student displaying an inability to effectively communicate at times, effectively write, or even do math computation. You may see this specifically in your students when they don't necessarily understand the instruction that you're giving them, or maybe they don't know how to follow the instructions. Also, in a way, you might present something and they seem to not understand what's going on. At times, they may not be able to communicate with their friends or with you as a teacher. Sometimes they may shut down and they may not want to write, or they may not want to participate. And this is not necessarily something that pertains to their behavior and their need to be naughty, or they're trying to not be active, but it could be that really they're just not understanding what's going on and they're choosing not to participate out of either fear or out of embarrassment that somebody else is going to find out that they're having a challenge. A specific learning disability has to do with one or more of the following: the way a student takes information, the way we perceive the environment, the way somebody is talking, and the way I'm receiving the information. It also has to do with the way a student learns. Now, we may have discussed in the past, or you may know, that we all learn differently. Some of us learn by moving, some of us learn by experiencing nature, others learn by singing or even doing math computation. And since we're all created so differently, we have to understand that the way we learn is also very different. We also have to take into consideration that a student may be organizing the thoughts in their head in a different way. Now, the way I organize things in my head is I put them in visual images. So if I'm reading a book, I have to understand the way the scene looks, the way the environment looks, the way the action took place. Somebody may interpret it differently. The way I memorize spelling words is by singing a song or maybe tapping my hand. Other students may do it differently. So we have to understand that every single student that you may have in your classroom may learn in a different format. And a specific learning disability sometimes impacts the way the student learns. Also, the way a specific learning disability manifests itself in the student is the way they respond emotionally to what we consider a typical situation. So you may have an episode in your classroom when you give a student a directive and all of a sudden the student just doesn't want to do it, or he may break down in tears. And like I said before, it's not that they're being naughty or unruly. It may just be that they don't understand what you're asking them to do, or maybe the time that it took for them to understand your command and the time it takes for them to be able to do it may be lengthy, and you may have responded before he was able to do it. So we have to have an awareness that students with learning disabilities sometimes operate on a different time frame than we do, and we have to be a little bit more patient with them. A specific learning disability really comes across in the work that you give them. Something that may seem simple to some students may be very difficult for them. And it's not that they can't do it, it's just simply they have a hard time showing you how they can do it. Also, it could be that the material that you're presenting in class or the way you're presenting the material is not really speaking to their strength as a learner. When you have students with a specific learning disability in your classroom, they may display a little bit of what would appear strange behavior or odd behavior towards either you or the teacher. And again, this is just a way that they're interpreting the environment, the way they're picking up the clues or the context or every part of your instruction. There are 4 areas that we can consider, that we can address when we are working with students with learning disabilities. The first one is the way we present the material or the way we present our instruction. The second is how we ask students to show us how they're completing the work. The third one is the classroom environment, the way we structure our classroom. And the third one is time. So looking at the first one, the way we present the material, we have to consider that maybe we should supplement what we're saying, our words that we're using, with maybe some sort of visual. And it could be either a picture, it could be pointing it to the book, or it could be the use of our hands. Sometimes our hands can emphasize a point and draw the student or the learner into the discussion that we're having. Also, we might need to consider that we may have to give them a little bit more practice. Now, we have to be careful that the student doesn't consider this to be a punishment for not knowing how to do the work. We present extra work to say, you know what, I can tell that you may be struggling with this. Let me give you additional resources that might help you. One thing with this, though, is we have to make sure that the student doesn't feel that you're punishing him for not knowing the work. How we ask the student to show the work, or how we assess what they're doing, is something very important to consider, because this is where we're going to see differences in the way one student responds as opposed to the way another student responds. We have to consider that maybe we should ask them, instead of writing their words, maybe they can tell us their words. Instead of spelling them on paper, maybe they can say them orally. Because there's two different processes that are taking place when we ask a student to write a word and when we're asking a student to speak a word. So we have to consider that maybe for that particular student, saying the word is going to be a lot easier. We also have to ask them to tell us and let us know which modality would be better for you. What are you more comfortable? And not at the sake of not asking them to do what everybody else is doing, but maybe into easing them on in to a format that everybody else can do. If you recall what I said a few minutes ago, we all have different ways of learning. Similarly, we all have different ways that we're able to express ourselves, and we're going to be more proficient in the ways that we feel stronger. The third thing I would recommend is that we need to consider to allow the student to turn in maybe a different assignment that challenges or evaluates the same objectives that you had for the lesson. So maybe a student is turning in a paper, and our student with a specific learning disability may be able to turn in a picture and explain it to the class, or do a presentation, or act it out. Something that for him may be more comfortable, but yet you're still able to evaluate the objectives that you had targeted for that instructional segment. The third thing is the classroom environment. How do you arrange your classroom? I would ask you that we evaluate the room and we consider where is the best place for the student to learn. We may have to ask the student to sit maybe at the front of the room and near the teacher, away from distractions, maybe away from the door or the window, where the student can disengage with the lesson to be focused in something else. We also have to ask, is it a long period of time? I personally cannot sit for more than 20 minutes without having to get up. And so we know that maybe some children need more breaks in their time. Maybe the assignment is too long and they may need to stretch. How about including maybe some exercises? We know that exercise activates our brain, and with active brains we're more likely to get engaged. So maybe stop the class in the middle of the time and do some stretches, or maybe get the kids moving so then they can go back and focus on their assignment. The last thing we have to consider is time. How much time we spend on an assignment, or how much time we're asking the student to dedicate to the one thing we're asking them to do. We may need to give them extra time. They may not be able to finish it before you go out to play or before they have to go home, and that is okay. Sometimes we need to let them take extra time so they can do the best work. When we feel rushed or when we feel we're going to run out of time, we may do work and it turns out being sloppy or incomplete. And we definitely don't want to punish a student for doing something that he thinks we want him to do when all we could have done is just given him extra time. Like I said before, we want to give him breaks, and breaks throughout the day are so important. So in addition to your recess time or your lunch time, maybe just stopping and letting the kid have a quiet time, letting the child sit maybe in a corner and engage in something that he likes doing, whether it be reading a book or looking at a picture book, maybe talking with friends, or maybe working in another skill that he may feel stronger in. A specific learning disability doesn't mean that the student won't be able to do all the work. It just means that in one particular area, he may be struggling. I do want us to consider, though, that that particular area may affect other areas. So we have to be able to decipher and say, what is the student really struggling with? The last thing about time that I would ask you to consider is that we have to give them a concrete measure of what time is. So if you tell me, hey Alex, you have 5 minutes, and I don't have a watch or there's not a clock on the wall, for me 5 minutes may be a very short amount of time, or it could be a great amount of time. So maybe we can use a timer, or maybe we can point to a clock on the wall, or even give them a schedule to where we're able to point out to the student, this is what we're going to do next, and this is how much time we have. I know that when I feel rushed, I'm going to try to get it done. Or if I feel that I'm going to miss recess or going somewhere because I'm not finished, I'm going to rush through it. So therefore, my work is going to be not as satisfactory as it could be. The last thing I would ask you to consider is that we need to keep communication with everybody who's involved. So that means that we need to talk to the teachers involved with the student. We need to involve everybody who comes in contact with him and find out if we're seeing the same thing in different environments. It could be that the behavior that you're just seeing in the student could be related to the subject that the student is having a hard time with. One teacher may say that he's doing great in the class and he's doing all the work, and another teacher may say that they cannot get the student to work. That could be related specifically to the material that's being taught. And the last thing is we have to be patient. We know that the student will learn the skill. The challenge is that it might take him longer, but he still can learn the skill.